Hello again, everybody at the CRP. Hey, it's Chad, your sometimes host. Hasn't been for a long time. I'm super happy to be back with you. I had some things going on in my life that we'll get into a little bit later. We're going to do an outside the cage today, and we're going to talk about some stuff that, of course, everything in our life revolve around fighting in one way or another, so it doesn't make any difference. But we're going to talk about some stuff that I have just gone through with my son. It also pertains to me, and it pertains to fighters in multitudes of different ways. I'd also like to talk a little bit about Deontay Wilder and the fight that wasn't is what that should be called. I'm not sure. Of course I'm keeping up with you guys and watching your podcasts, and you and ASP did a fantastic podcast on did Deontay Wilder go too far? And, we can address that just a little bit. I think it's been almost beaten to death, but one more whip won't hurt anything, I guess, just to talk about it a little bit more. And then we're going to get into the big stuff. Number one, I want to talk about promotions and how an actual promotion works, because I don't think people understand that. And Deontay Wilder is going to be the lead into that. So for all of you who have missed me or asked me where I'm at and all of that stuff, none of you, I've had a family issue going on, some health issues, and my son, my only son, solamente hijo, practicing my Spanish. The doctors are going to love me for that. They watch the show now because my son was in an accident in 2010 with my mother. He was hit by a truck. My mother's van was hit by a truck, T-boned, and my mother passed instantly, suffered a massive traumatic brain injury followed by a massive stroke on day 6, and was in a coma for several months. And they said he would never walk again. He would never talk. He would never set up. He would stare at the ceiling and drool. He's out there right now coloring. We proved him wrong. And we just got back from Medellin, Colombia, where we did stem cell treatments. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that. And then we'll get very extensive into stem cell treatments on another episode, because I know way, way, way more than a human being should probably know about one particular subject. But it's just kind of how I am. I get involved in something and I want to know everything about it. So anyways, with no further ado, hello, Miguel. How are you, brother?
Welcome back, Chad, and just good to hear your voice. And definitely going to be an interesting podcast. I think, Deontay Wilder will give us, a little bit of fight talk and stuff, and then we'll wander around and see what else goes on. I am interested in Soda's progress, obviously. I think, even if no one else cares, and obviously that's not going to be the case, but it's just a heartwarming story for me to hear your progress and stuff. So I enjoy it all the time. And, big hug to the little guy there. But, once you start talking about stem cell treatments, you're starting to talk about, something that's kind of cutting edge. And it's interesting that when you're on this edge, all of a sudden MMA guys are starting to show up there, including, an MMA guy who fought, I think maybe even a title fight recently. I'm not sure if it was a title fight. We won't elaborate, but it was a high-level fighter that was down there, and they had gotten stem cell treatments on all their knuckles, you're telling me, right? So without giving any names away, how does that play into PEDs? Is stem cells okay?
Okay, so yeah, let's get right into that. Screw it. Let's just jump right in and tackle the big question. Okay, so what is a PED? Because EPO is actually just something that makes your blood oxygenate better. So they pull out your blood, and then that's blood doping. And then you use EPO, and then they put your old blood back in once it's oxygenated, and then you have like kind of double oxygenation. So our hyperbarics, which do sort of the same thing. We were in a hyperbaric tank once a day for 9 days, the entire time we were in Colombia, because that's part of his treatment as well. so are hyperbarics? Where do you draw the line in combat sports specifically, but in all sports really? Where do you draw the line and say this is okay, this is whatever? I mean, what happens when they're able to put tendons in? What about the guy, the Muay Thai guy? I don't know his name. You might know him. But did you see the story about the Muay Thai guy who put metal shins in?
No.
Yeah, there's an X-ray and you see the metal shin, and he's got metal shins. Well, that's cheating, obviously.
Yeah, that's.
But what about when Tim Sylvia broke his arm when he didn't tap? Everybody remembers that. Herb Dean stepped in and everybody was mad. Tim was mad, and Herb's like, "You broke your arm." I've refereed with Herb. He's a good guy, and he honestly has the most concern for the fighters of any referee I know. Troy Y, maybe. Hi, Troy. So Tim Sylvia snaps his arm with Andrei Arlovsky, right? I think I'm right about that.
No, Mir.
Frank Mir, you're right. So Frank Mir snaps Tim Sylvia's arm. Tim Sylvia comes back, and he says it'll never snap again because now there's a metal rod from here to here. Is that some type of body enhancement? So we're getting ready to step into a new era of body enhancement that we haven't seen before. It's not just about boobs and breasts and lips and liposuction anymore. They've transversed this into something completely different. So as you were alluding to, by the way, BioAccelerator, if you want to know, call me, talk to me, message me. I'll tell you all about BioAccelerator. They're the people that are doing the treatment for my son's brain injury. He's receiving stem cells. They're mesenchymal stem cells or mesenchymal stem cells, however you want to pronounce it. And they are taken from adipose tissue out of the umbilical cord. So there's no fetal tissue, none of that. It's extremely professional, clean, and it's flawlessly done, to say the least. They're great doctors, and we're very grateful for them. So what's up to my new family in Colombia? I love you guys. So while I'm there, of course, the topics come up. What do you do? What do you do for a living? Well, I'm a podcaster, and on top of that, well, how'd you get into that? Well, when I was 28 years old, 27 years old, I started fighting professionally. In 93, I saw the UFC, and we started looking for anything we could and having fights in backyards and all kinds of stuff. And that led to present day Cage Rage, and all the rest of these organizations. So through that conversation, the nurse that was running the hyperbaric treatment, Diana, hi Diana, love you, baby. Diana said, oh, well, that's really interesting because we had a fighter come down here, and I don't know his name, but he had all of his knuckles injected with stem cells, not just an IV, but he had them directly injected into his knuckles. Is that cheating, Miguel?
That's the open question here, and that's the thing with the whole PED and Veda. And Veda, is on the ropes again for just bad presentation. I forget the name of the female fighter, but this is some of the shenanigans that have been going on there. The girl was put on a 24-month suspension, and at 23 months they said, hey, we made a mistake. We're going to waive that.
And what was the mistake?
That the test came back wrong or whatever, that they were not going to, she was no longer suspended. They were nullifying the suspension. Anyway, I don't have exact details in front of me of that, but it's part of what I see as the overall problem, and I don't see enough conversation about it. Because the bottom line is this is, you are at here's the ethical question. Here's what really needs to be asked, right? Because here we have a cutting-edge clinic clean, with good doctors, reviewed, by yourself enough that you can trust them with your child's life in their hands.
We actually had a meeting with his entire medical staff in the United States via WhatsApp, spoke to their doctors, neurologists.
It's very serious stuff.
Everything.
Your child has a traumatic brain injury from when he was 1 year old. 3 years old, that he's been working through literally for the majority of his life. So
10 years.
Is that the person these stem cell treatments are for, or is it for elite athletes looking for an edge? So now, if you can answer that question, if it's for both, then it's for both, then we're okay. But here's the other part of it is, with the current policing system, the current policing system is a system of catching up. So something has to happen for them to say that's illegal.
Yeah.
So a new drug, there's the possibilities of new drugs or new treatments that will be in play and being used by athletes because they're not illegal, especially via Veda. And this has gone on cyclically all the time. So the cheaters, so to speak, the people looking for an edge are sometimes not cheaters at the point where until Veda, and again, now you're talking about, as you understand as an academic, it's not like, oh, this stuff is bad, let's put it on the list. It's got to go through a scientific process, whatever that is. And I'm ignorant, but, they have to have control groups and, a certain body of work and over years and, and really test it and have the test verified by a separate clinic. That's how things get put on a list. So
that's funny you should say that.
Because while they're doing all that, to put it on the list of illegal things, it remains legal and can be used. And it's funny that you mentioned the EPO, which is to add to your blood thing, because there are many variations of that. A few years back, the Russians were all using a drug that was developed by Russian doctors that did precisely that. It opens up your ability to take in oxygen. And this drug affected their tennis players as well. It was their top tennis players, Sharapova. I'm not familiar with the tennis players' names, but it extended itself to a major scandal where twice Alexander Povetkin in boxing had world title fights canceled because he tested positive for this drug that he took while it was legal.
So how do you look? First of all, I'm not sure we plan to get in this deeply into this, but here we are. So screw it. Let's go with it. Because, the first thing you have to look at is this. Is whether it's legal or not, John Jones now is fighting with steroids in his system, and it's legal. Now, this has started to have a crossover where other athletes are saying, look, I've been cross-pollinated. I had it. I did my time. Is this the new edge that fighters are going to use? Did Dillashaw come out and say that so he could go ahead and get through it, get the suspension done, and get moving on, and he can continue to use it while he's suspended, one assumes. And I know that can be tricky because there's some of them are tested, some of them are not. It kind of depends on.
You have to meet some type of standard to get officially off the suspension, right?
Right. And so if John Jones is off the suspension, but he still has it in his system, it's scientifically impossible for him to have more of it than he had the time before without taking it.
So let's get back to my original question, because my original question is your son and people with that type of need the target for these types of treatments, or should it be elite athletes, right? That's the question. That's an ethical question for doctors. And there's your problem, because you could always find a doctor who's going to contradict another one. And kind of like in the world we live in, doctors don't call each other out on their own shit. You know what I mean? No. So for example, if I were to come along, and you can tie this into one of our old podcasts about Ad Walgast. So if I come along now and say, look, they used to take a goat's balls and shove them into your testicles and sew it up because thinking that the virility of the goat would get transferred somehow. But now we've done that more scientifically, and we've made this injection out of goat balls that you can shoot, and people start taking this. You know what I mean? It's like there's the problem. I'm a doctor prescribing that, and if I say it's a good treatment, the likelihood is most people, other doctors are going to say I wouldn't prescribe it, but that's as far as they'll go. Yeah, I wouldn't prescribe it. I wouldn't recommend that. But do they actually call this guy out and say, you know, you're taking a medicine there for people that are having trouble getting oxygen into their system that allows them to expand oxygen, and putting it into prime athletes who are already taking in substantially more oxygen than your average human being and adding it to it. So there's the ethical line, right? So some doctor, and I remember Chael Sonnen saying when he was defending his TRT, or I think it was Vitor actually, not Chael, but one of those two individuals, they were both definitely on the TRT, and both proud users of it. But that's the point. In their proud use, one of those guys, I'm pretty sure it was Vitor, said, I could die without the TRT. He could die. That athlete is just going to drop because he has no testosterone. My brother said, who's an MD and you know, is superficially interested in this stuff, and we'll talk about the ethics a little bit. He'll say to me, he goes, you know, when an athlete like a Chael Sonnen or a Vitor walks in, and if I'm measuring their testosterone and it's low, I would tell them to take a week off, you know, and their own bodies will build it back up. But then you get guys who are blown out to 30 times more than your average testosterone. Your body can't do that, right? So that's where the abuse comes in, and that's where you know, some doctors said, oh, no, it's low. We'll get it up there, and we'll keep it up there, and, you know, you could die without it. And there's Vitor in the press conference saying, I could die without the RT, you know. Again, where is there's some type of ethical thing where somebody says, really, Vitor could die. So in other words, if Vitor no longer competes, he's still going to be on TRT. You know, maybe because it feels good. So that's where there's
and yes, he okay. Well, first of all, Vitor is on TRT. Chael is on TRT. I am on TRT. You should be on TRT if you're not. If you're over the age of 35, go tell your doctor, put me on TRT so that you can actually feel better. Because when you hit 35, and 35 is a loose number, that could be 40, it could be 30. For some people, it could be 28. But you start to dive, and about 35 to 40, men bomb. And all of a sudden you go, man, I'm just not the man I used to be. I don't feel the same. Bam, you hit TRT, boom, you're back up. You're ready to go. You feel good. You're building muscle. You can do the things you weren't doing before. The aches and pains go away. Kind of the suffering from aging goes away. But there's a cost. There's a cost to that. And I don't think they talk enough about the cost of steroids especially on young athletes. If they would do that, I think people would be more apt to say, definitely 100% they shouldn't be used on anyone under the age of X, or anyone who has a testosterone reading lower than I don't know, X parts per million. Now, here's the thing. In my opinion, I think as a promoter and a manager, my position was always this. And of course, remember, I was promoting and managing when there was no oversight. We actually had to create our own oversight. But I was always of the attitude that if a fighter is over the age of 30, as hard as this sport is on the body, they're crazy if they're not taking something. I mean, they're all doing is creatine okay? I remember when that stuff first hit the market, in the early 90s, you could take that stuff and go from 130 to 145 pounds in 15 weeks, which seems like a long time, but you have to understand how muscle builds. So Is that illegal? Creatine's still legal. There are certain things that are legal, certain things that aren't. Now, creatine also has the effect of making you have muscle tears and all kinds of stuff. So that's another topic. But what I'm saying is this: what is the ethical responsibility of the promotion to care for the athlete? And if that care means that they're able to take something that makes them perform better, stronger, faster, and healthier, shouldn't they be wanting that? Shouldn't they be pushing that? Look at Pride. Look at the UFC. The Pride guys, everyone thought anyone in Pride can defeat anyone in the UFC in the heavyweights, right? And because Pride was basically only heavyweights at that time. And then when they came to the United States and had to be under, it wasn't USADA then, but under a commission where they were drug tested, suddenly they all got beat. And so therein lies the answer to your question: do steroids matter? Do they really make you that much better? Well, maybe it was the cage, maybe it was different rules, maybe it was age. You know, it could have been all of those things combined. I'm sure there's all of those are variables, but the one big variable there was that Pride was almost encouraging them to take steroids because they want them, just like in the WWE, they want their athletes to be huge and supernatural, and they want them to look like the Incredible Hulk and still be able to perform these awesome feats of being incredibly fast and lasting longer and never running out of oxygen and being able to hit much harder, much faster, and all of these great things. So, A, in my opinion, I think it rips off the fans. B, I think that it harms the promotion. And C, and the most important one, is that it harms the fighter. Now, if a fighter chooses not to take steroids in whatever performance enhancing or whatever performance enhancing drug they want to take, that's okay. That's their choice to do or not to do. But I believe if they want to, they should be able to. The counter argument to that, of course, is, well, that forces people who don't want to have to. So then we have, like they do in bodybuilding now, a natural versus an unnatural bodybuilding. No one watches the unnatural body or the natural bodybuilders, but they watch the unnatural bodybuilders to see just how incredibly enormous these people can make their muscles. I mean, they're functionally disabled by this because they can't do anything except walk around. But nonetheless, you know, that's the idea. How freaky can you get was the bodybuilding motto in the 90s. How big of a freak can you get? And that still exists. Now they say we have a natural and then we have bodybuilding. They don't say we have steroid bodybuilding. We have natural bodybuilding. So this brings us to this huge topic, right? Where we start looking at what is the complexity of categorically, how do you categorize all of these things and make them work? Do you have a steroid UFC and a non-steroid UFC? That's silly. Why don't we just go back to the days when fighters, why don't we just say this? If you can take stem cells, which I literally saw the picture of this person. I'm not going to mention names because that would, you know, I don't want to call anyone out or put anyone on display. But for example,
he did win by knockout.
He did win by knockout, and I did see the picture of him holding both belts, and he did look massive.
You may have just.
Well, he was. Any fighter can hold two belts. There's a lot of them.
Anyway, yeah, no, we're okay. I mean, I don't care. I really don't care.
I mean, you know, I'm just saying, other fighters are now going to be doing stem cells. I assure you. While I was there, okay, so Chael Sonnen talks openly about using bioaccelerator to go to Medellin, Colombia, and do the exact same thing my son just had done, except my son's was far more intensive. There is another athlete that is going to be doing this. That landed. We flew out Friday morning. He landed Friday afternoon. That is going to be doing this to try and help him. And so there's a study that is happening with my son and this athlete. And the study is basically what are the effects of age with stem cells on brain injury, etc. There's a multitude of information that's going to come from this study. It's going to be huge. And my guess is that by this time next year, everybody on the planet will know who Zane Edward Kingsley Soda Pop Wagoner is, which is my son. And we have already one injection, Miguel, one injection of stem cells that took 45 minutes in a gravity drip into his arm in an IV, or into his wrist right here. The next day, we were pushing him back in his wheelchair because the complex is so massive that we just couldn't let him walk that much because it was just too hard on him. But having said that, I looked down and his leg was shaking, his left leg, where he's paralyzed on his left side. Now, it's called hemiparalysis because he has a right side brain injury, and then he has a full stroke injury, which would be called global. When his left leg started shaking, that's called clonus. In other words, the brain is firing, and so it would be like my hand shaking like this, kind of. You can imagine that. And me not being able to control it, as Lou Gehrig's disease does, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we had not seen him have clonus in 8 years in his leg. One stem cell treatment, and he had clonus in his leg, which means something was happening already. So having said that, where combat sports comes in, if we can do that to someone who has a child who has severe, the most severe brain injury you can have without death. For example, the neurologist said da 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 to Dr. Halpert, and Dr. Halpert said he wants to see the new MRI, not the old one. And I said that is the new one. That's 2 months old. And he said, no, it's impossible. And I said, that is his new MRI of his brain. And he looked at us and shook his head, and he said, da 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 da. And Dr. Halpert interpreted for me and said, can you have Zane, my son, Soda Pop, demonstrate some things that he can do? So I said, okay, Zane, raise your left arm. And his arm is kind of like this all the time. He'll take his hand and bend it around because the brain fires all the time. It makes him feel better to take that pressure off, mm-hmm. which is a part of clonus, but it eventually you kind of get used to it. And he hit with his left hand and his left wrist. He's never gotten used to it. So he takes his wrist, he holds it up like this. And that neurologist just and I said, walk to the door and back. So Zane gets up and he walks to the door and back. And, he's happy and showing off. And they were crying. They'd never seen anything like it. And he said, who is his therapist? And I pointed to my wife, who's an amazing human being. And I said, that's his therapist. He has many therapists and doctors, but she is his therapist. All of this will eventually come out on film because they're filming everything, for not just for the study, but hopefully to educate people on what's going on with stem cells and the importance of using stem cells in the United States, opening this up and starting to do a new chapter in the United States on let's really research this and get people this treatment because it matters. So he was completely baffled by it. And I showed him, because when you look at an MRI, most people never even seen one, but an MRI of the brain, you can literally see where there's a dead spot in his brain. There's basically, a hole where there's no activity. And that's just dead cells. Stem cells come in and they lattice onto that. And eventually that hole, we hope, will fill in completely, we hope. And then and we're in the process now of training the cells that are in there to do what the other brain cells around it do. Okay, so having said all of that, I got off topic there a little bit. Sorry, but it's important that you understand. It's important that people understand this, because where that matters is this. So now an athlete comes in and he says, I ripped my shoulder. Joe Rogan, he's always talking about, I had shoulders, I had shoulder problems for years. It got to where I couldn't use my arm anymore, really, and it was surgery or nothing. And then I ran into a guy in Las Vegas who does stem cell treatment. There are specific types of stem cell treatment for adults only in the United States that you can get for, say, a bad knee, a bad hip, a bad shoulder, things like that. I think Canada's a little more forward thinking than we are still, but the FDA is a long process. So you're going to have athletes going to Medellin, Colombia, because they hear this podcast, and they're going to contact BioAccelerator and say, what do I have to do to get in on this? Dana White was there. And I can say that openly because he said it. Chael Sonnen was there. I sat in the same chair as Chael and watched my son get his drip. And I can say that because he said it openly. So there are fighters who are openly going down there now because they've learned the values. And many of them are going down there without any real reason. So Chael, when he talked about his experience down there, and you can catch his podcast on it. I don't know what number it is, but just look up Chael and stem cells and you'll find it, But when he spoke of it, he said, I didn't have anything necessarily wrong, other than I just had a whole bunch of stuff wrong from fighting for all these years and wrestling and competing. That wears your body out over time, and it's usage. So he had usage issues, and he's seen great improvements from it. He probably needs to do it again because it's a process of layering it. But okay, so there you go. Tell me, Miguel, what's wrong with that? What's wrong with an athlete going to do that? Tell me what's wrong with that.
I think at its most superficial, the image in average Joe's head is that somebody's going to take steroids and they're going to get so strong that when they punch someone in the head, that head's going to explode. I think that's at the end. I mean, at its most.
You really mean that?
Yes, I really do.
Okay. Okay.
It's most essential. They think that their strength, you can kill somebody with one blow. And that's, I think.
You can anyway.
Exactly. And we've got 700 deaths in this sport already. So, and I'm talking about boxing, and in MMA, there's less, but, there have been here and there. And it's going to continue to happen just because of the nature of the sport. So yep. the idea that the enhancement is going to be such that their power is going to be so much that they can kill people with punches and stuff like that. Your average Joe is going to be so strong you can kill people with one punch, or you could, rip someone's arm. I really think it's at that level of stupidity that the policing is at. Because,
really?
Yes, because I think if you go back to it, I think the original thing of steroids is that steroids are to make you stronger. And it's not like that anymore. Everything that you've said, everything about this podcast is that's so scientific now. If you want to lose weight, you want to get stronger, if you want to improve your wind, your air, if you want to improve your tendon strength, it's down to a science at every single level now. But it didn't used to be that way. You know,
Yeah.
this has only been a 21st century development where it's gotten hyper scientific like that. So at its most artificial, I still go back to the image of people injecting mule hormone like in the 70s. They wanted to be strong.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And I think
Yes.
that's the big fear of steroids and strength, that someone's going to get so strong that they could kill somebody. And now
Okay.
you graduate that into the sports world, and it becomes a little bit more aggravated too, because I think there's an agreement that they're not supposed to right now, and I mean that's the rule.
Okay.
So when someone
Okay, but hold on. Okay, so that's like the crazy tinfoil hat idea. But for the general public, what is the perception of steroids? For those who are against it, the anti-doping, what is the perception? What do they say?
The rhetoric you get is that it's bad and that they're cheaters.
Cheaters.
They're cheaters.
Cheaters. That's it. Do you believe personally that they're cheating if they're taking steroids? If it's open, if they openly say, yeah, I take steroids. Mark Coleman, I mean, come on. Kevin Randleman, rest in peace. I mean, they were pretty open about it. They didn't, they didn't come right out and go, I just took 3 Diana balls, this morning, and I've got to take my Anadrol this afternoon to pop that up, and I just took 400 milligrams, or I just took 3 milligrams of Test 400 and some Anthionate and a suspension and some Decadurabolin for my tendons. They didn't go that far, but they never said, no, of course I don't take steroids. They just kind of ignored the answer. But everyone knew they took steroid. One look, and look at Vitor before testosterone replacement. After, I mean, it's obvious. So is it cheating if they tell the truth?
Yeah, according to, how do you want me to analyze that? As a lawyer?
I'm asking you. We're having a conversation. I don't give a shit about anybody. What do you say?
If I were to assume a legal hat, and I'm not a lawyer, obviously, but if I were to take it in legalese like Bill Clinton would, I didn't have a relationship with that wife, try to twist it around. Yes, it's absolutely illegal because the rules right now in place are that.
Okay. But do you believe take you and I are going to have a fight, and we say in 6 months we're going to meet in Florida and we're going to have a fight, you and me, and we're going to do this on air. We're going to show everybody, and you're going to take steroids and I'm not. But I know you're going to do that, and you tell me I'm going to take steroids. This is my regimen of what I'm doing every day. These are the steroids I'm taking. This is how I'm taking them. And I give you 6 months to train a guy who's never really fought, right? And I've fought. And we go out there, and I make the agreement with you to do that. And we have a fight in public and whatever, however we do it. I don't think that's cheating. Do you?
Yeah, no, I understand the point. Yeah, and ethically, I think it's an almost more honest way that way than you have, because I think some people might back out of a competition, but I think some people might very well go ahead and say, I'll fight anyway, I don't care. Or I'll take steroids too if that was the case and they're legal. But that's the thing about the rules, and what makes it funny and just such a bureaucracy and an American system is that there are rules and we can't enforce them. So everything you see is mummery. You know what I mean? It's just a ridiculous show to make it try to look good. But basically, that's the big argument on an international level. And that's the Russian approach. The Russian approach is that this is science. It's not cheating. It's like we're better off, There are boxers from the 20s and 30s that died during having eye operations. Just Harry Greb, Dick Tiger, and that wasn't even to reattach retinas, but they were just maybe getting some work done and things like that, and they died on the operating table because they couldn't even handle, the anesthetics correctly at that time. There were mess ups and things. So medicine's improved. We don't, they don't technically die on the operating table now, but when they were getting medical attention, there were problems. And then you have Sugar Ray Leonard, who made a famous comeback with his retina reattached. And that was a huge controversy at the time.
Huge.
And how many guys go through that operation now? Dozens.
It's got to be, hundreds, I would think. In the entire fight, in the entire boxing realm.
So whereas at some point Sugar Ray Leonard was retired and should have had to stay retired because of an eye detachment, a retina detachment in his eye, science was able to reattach it and bring it back in there for him, and he was able to perform more. So that's that's one of the arguments for it, that it could really help. But there you're talking about an eye reattachment. You're not talking about that idea of I became so strong, or I'm so much faster, or I'm so much more explosive that the person's chances of dying in my hands are greater.
Okay, so how about this then? What if? And I don't know the details of this, but I do know that this exists. That some people, there's a baseball movie about a kid who breaks his arm or something, and it makes him throw a super fastball because it shortens his tendon or something like that. What if you could go through? I don't know the name of the movie. It was some kid's movie from the 90s. But what if you could go through a process of surgeries where they could add or detract from your tendons to make you throw faster or harder, or be unable to be tapped out with an arm bar or whatever that is that cheating? Is that too far?
It's funny, if you've been on the mats at all and stuff like that, and applied arm bars, you've probably at some point run into a guy who's freaky double jointed, and you just kind of can't arm bar him. Should that be
no matter what?
Well, this guy can't fight. I can't arm bar him. You know what I mean? So that's the part of it is at what point. I think the idea of the whole testing and everything is to protect them. And there is an aspect of this is protection when you're improving their eyesight, when you're extending their careers, and they're able to do that and continue to operate healthily and not do things. There's an aspect of we're preventing all that good. And I think what is it that they're trying to prevent is literally the ignorance of, with enhancements, they could kill somebody. That's the true fear here. And I think that, we've already proven people are going to die in this sport one way or another. And, if we can accept that, move on and consider every individual item like that a tragedy and something that hopefully we can learn from and stuff like that. But, I don't know at this point that if somebody was under medical care, getting whatever the medical edge is, I'll give you a good example. Do you know who Victor Conti is for contest, if you don't remember the name? Victor Conti is the Balco guy who used to give Barry Bonds the cream and the clear and the whole thing. And he did his jail time for the whole baseball scandal and steroids and things.
Which was nuts.
Victor Conti is now owns a clinic in California called Snack. Superior Nutrition and something like that. And the bottom line is truthfully, if Victor Conti is going to be there playing by the existing rules, who better than the guy who used to know how to break them to also walk the line and toe the line perfectly for you? But now check this out, because this is one of those things where you got to go, okay, every fighter up until this point has, always talked about the potential of training in altitude and what that means. And many look for it. They seek to train in altitude. They alter their lives, pay for training, and head off into the mountains. Big Bear for the boxers, and Denver is another place there. The Mexicans all have, Mexico City sits higher than Denver, So the Mexicans all have their places in the mountains and things. And no, I don't have to go into altitude training as something that's sought after. But you got to alter your life and go spend 6 months or 6 weeks in the mountains, or a period of your training time there, so your lungs get acclimated and stuff. Well, Victor Conti now has a room where they can control the oxygen and simulate you being at 8,000 feet, 9,000 feet. Now you just have to go to the gym. You don't have to alter your life.
It's like a big bubble.
So how, if I was a boxer, it'd be like, I went to Denver I was away from my wife and kids, you know what I mean? And it's like, that ain't fair, It's like, that's the thing is like, someone does something, someone goes, that ain't fair. And all of a sudden it's in question, right? But there's always going to be advancements. Victor Conti is now on, it's air. It's management of air. I don't think it's illegal. You know what I mean? But I think it's such an enhancement on having to go to the mountains with your trainer. It's all money. It's actually a money saver for fighters potentially in their training, and you can still charge an exorbitant fee. You know what I mean? But these are advances in the sport, and I think that there's certain advances that we poo-poo away from. And at the end, if it's a private property issue, if the athlete is okay with putting something in his body, and he's okay with facing somebody who's been doing that, then I think that's the first hurdle. Is there may be fighters who won't do it, and there may be a call for a league. But I think, especially in this, which is a little bit of a man-driven kind of macho, there's a machismo to it. I don't think there's going to be that many guys that say, I won't fight. Even Anthony Joshua had an opponent change recently in boxing. Jarrell Miller failed for 3 different steroids. So he was at the buffet. You know what I mean? And Anthony Joshua came out and said, I'll fight him on steroids. It's just the system. You know what I mean? He wasn't going to be worried. Jarrell Miller wasn't going to kill him or do something in the match. He wasn't worried about them. And the fact is if you're an athlete around that level, you've probably been around steroids. You've probably seen some of the benefits of them. And the benefits are that most people talk about are in the recovery time for the gym time, and it extends your ability to train, and therefore there's improvements in things.
Definitely.
It doesn't get so strong. It's like, I used to be strong, but now I'm so strong I can punch through a wall or kill someone with one punch. But I think that's kind of the original 1950s old man kind of marijuana's bad and steroids are bad kind of short-term mentality that comes with the policing of what is an extremely delicate and extremely complex issue.
Yeah, that's really interesting, Miguel, that, I completely missed that. I never thought about that. The only thing that I've ever thought about with steroids is people say it's cheating. I never thought about the aspect of it's unsafe because someone will be so much better than everyone else that they'll literally be the Incredible Hulk, and they'll be a different species. So that leads me to my next question for you. You're familiar with CRISPR and Cas9, right?
Go ahead and fill me in.
Okay, so CRISPR, Cas9, CRISPR, and I don't know all the details to it, but basically, they have I think they started out using a virus to do it, but now they have a protein that can go in and it'll be picked up. So a little cellular biology here. Your cells have there's a fat wall around each cell, and it has the lipids are penetrable, but they're only penetrable by certain things that can kind of skimmy through them. So proteins are things that skimmy through them, and they get inside the cell. And when they get inside the cell, they're part of the reproductive process. So your mitochondria grabs it, goes over, unzips the DNA, your ladder, your staircase, your spiral, unzips the DNA, takes it, and then you have what's called RNA then, and RNA is 1/2 of that DNA. And what CRISPR does is it comes in and it puts a different protein where this protein's at on the RNA ladder. So RNA here, this is your DNA. It's split apart. through the process, and then it's put back together and reproduced. This is how mutations happen, etc. The whole thing. I mean, this is how our lives work. This is DNA. So now with CRISPR, you are going to begin to see a difference. It's going to start with parents saying, I want my child to have blue eyes. Well, we can do that. We know we can do that already. I'd like my child to be a little bit taller. So what happens when it's, well, I want my child to be 300 pounds. I want him to be shredded. I want him to be able to run extremely fast. And just, you can just see where it goes from there. And this is the beginning of genetic splicing to change and genetically modify a human being. And you can do that. Soon you'll be able to do it at any age. Is that cheating? That's certainly a hell of a lot more than taking steroids.
Yeah, look, again, the problem with the policing things, and they're always going to be a step behind, is the big thing for me, right? So these things aren't, technically, they're not illegal right now. You know what I mean? And it's like, and again, even when it just comes to like the pure powder liquid injection, I'm injecting steroids and stuff like that. Even when you get down to the raw basics of that, it's pharmaceutical companies and pharmaceutical things like that that are, that have these things developed and made, and they put them out there and stuff. And they do go through a process first to be made legal, right? But until then, they could be tests and test things like that. And they're not on an illegal list for the Veda testing or something like that. And then, so it's years before a substance can actually get on there. And there could be many years of it being used in a legal way. So it's always a game of cat and mouse where they're chasing down that. And I'm not surprised, if you get into gene splicing, the kid was built that way. It reminded me, kind of an indirect subject, but you had the story, I don't know if you remember, a guy named Todd Marinovich. Kid was a first round. I think he quarterbacked at one of the big California schools, USC or UCLA. I'm sorry, I don't know exactly which way. I think it's USC.
Okay.
But maybe not, but it doesn't matter. He was drafted in the first round, late in the first round, but he was drafted by the Raiders. And then he flunked out after a couple of years and went and, was painting in the mountains and kind of stuff, grew his hair long and never wanted a quarterback in his life, except for at 6 months old, his father actually would take the 6-month-old and do sit-ups for the kid so that he would start the muscle develop from a very early age, push-ups. He was on a diet and regimen from when he was 6 years old, from when he was 6 months old. He was a kid in high school who never had a McDonald's hamburger and stuff. This was never considered cheating and stuff like that, but it almost kind of ruined the kid's life.
It's probably bad parenting.
But the point is, too much of a good thing always turns into something bad, right? So if this is your obsessions and things like that, I don't know. But if you're looking to get better at your job, and your job involves speed and stuff like that, I mean, this crosses over into a lot of other sports if it were to be legal, right? You'd have, 600-foot home runs, and, Mark McGwire's record would be shambles, and, Babe Ruth's numbers would be almost insignificant. And you'd have to really tell the story there about that. How about football players? It's like, at what point, what those big companies and stuff like that, you look at some of the athletes, are they really freak athletes, or were they on some type of substance, even if it was legal at the time, that's now illegal and stuff? Remember Bo Jackson?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, but the things that Bo Jackson did, it was like, when you go to professional football, you're talking about the elite of the elite athletes in the United States.
Absolutely.
Do you know, once in a generation, you get maybe a guy that is so noticeably better than everybody else. And then, if you have a Tom Brady type, he's not doing it totally with physicality, right? But Bo Jackson was literally faster and stronger than everybody else playing football for a short period of time until he had his hip injury.
Yeah.
It was deranged. Now, I'd like to see him come and say, was he totally a clean athlete, or were there some things there that maybe now are classified as steroids? And certainly because of his elite nature, what was the landscape? What did he really have access to? Because this is the 90s or the 80s and stuff like that. So I think that that's a transitional period where the big money came in, and then by the late time, then you did have the baseball scandal where now you had a full-fledged clinic making illegal, steroids that are not illegal because scientifically they're not on the list. Take out an ingredient and it's no longer, they got it down to
a five-sided steroid became a six-sided steroid became a five-sided steroid.
And that's, Victor Conti, I believe that the whole cream and clear and stuff like that, all that junk with the baseball scandal was the first step towards making this more advanced. And again, Victor Conti did jail time, but he's now out there.
Which is insane.
And he's a scientist. So he's still out there and he's still at the cutting edge of this stuff. So that's the point, is there is always going to be the philosophical point of advancement and science and things moving forward. Some of the things are abuses. Like I like testosterone for a 35-year-old athlete because they're telling me that they could die without testosterone treatment. I don't buy that. I also
that's bullshit.
I also don't know, but after a certain period, what about the drugs that the Russians were taking? What about EPO, which allows you to take more oxygen in? That is probably one of the more surreptitious and valuable enhancements that you could have in a fight. That he's not going to wear me out. You know what I mean?
Hey, if anybody wants to send me free EPO, just give me a call. I'd love to have it. I'd be on it in a second. I wouldn't think twice about it. I'd love it.
The podcast version of the heavy-handed handshake.
So this leads me to something else then. Okay. You were talking about Bo Jackson, Deontay Wilder. Okay. He did some crazy stuff outside of the ring and said some stuff that was pretty nasty. I look at it from a promotional standpoint and say, do you remember when Mike Tyson told Lennox Lewis he was going to eat his children? How terrible was that? And then it gets forgotten and people don't think about it anymore. So I mean, all of that is selling the fight, no matter what. All of that's selling the fight. And in my opinion, although I may not like it, I don't think there's a boundary that you can step over. Certainly, social media may tell you otherwise. And if that happens, you'll know, because your pay-per-view sales drop, your sponsorships drop, your dollars drop, and that tells you. But I would be willing to bet that Wilder's income rapidly increased with those comments, not decreased, first of all. So I want to talk about that, but I also want to talk about this with Deontay Wilder. Here's a guy who, if you put him up, picture Deontay Wilder in the ring with a guy like Larry Holmes, Muhammad Ali, Holyfield, Klitschko. I mean, at his peak, at their peak, he is miles, fathoms beneath them as far as his skill set is concerned. But that guy has something bizarre. And if you're good, what I'm getting at is that cheating? If you're that much better than everybody else, can you call that cheating then? Or should we say, how dare we not allow anyone who fights Deontay Wilder to take steroids to at least make it even when they punch one another? Because that guy punches so fast and hard that he has very little skill set. His foot movement is, ooh, boy. I mean, if I'm a boxing coach, and I'm not a boxing aficionado by any means, but you're pretty technically savvy on all of this. So break down the Deontay Wilder thing for me.
All right.
First of all, start with, first of all, let's hit real quickly.
All right.
Hit what he said, and then go to the genetics.
All right, let's talk about the comments first. The comments start along the lines of, hey, I'm going to kill this guy. And,
Yeah.
we've heard variations of that, and we're going to eat your children and stuff like that. But, when pressed in stuff, somebody said something along the lines of, it's boxing, people have died and stuff. He's like, no, I want a body. I want a body on my record. And there are boxers who have killed other people who would just cringe at that. And there have been a few of them that have come out and
Boom
said,
Boom Mancini and Dooku Kim.
And trust me, I wonder what Boom Boom would say specifically about Deontay's comment. I want that. I want a body bag, because he was very adamant about it. He repeated it in a couple of different occasions, said he'd be willing to pay for the funeral, but he was okay with it, and they better bring body bags and that sort of stuff. And it was the repetition of it, the not backing off of it just a little bit, that really caught people off guard, because there is a couple, there's as you said, in promotion, there's very few things that are sacrosanct. You know what I mean?
It's repulsive. It's repulsive, but it's capitalism.
Yeah.
Capitalism can be repulsive.
And I think Deontay's an instinctual guy. So he's talking trash post-fight, doing whatever he can to build up the fight, and that's what came out of his mouth. And I think his great performance, and I think in the post-fight, he sort of addressed it. He didn't come right out and say, I'm sorry I said that. But he said, you build things up, you say things in the heat of the moment. And I think he tried to excuse himself a little bit for it. And for me, I'm all right with it at that point, as long as it never happens again. It's just a black mark, and there you have crossed the line. Like I said, even him as a PBC fighter, and just to point out, I've said this on a couple other places, but as a PBC fighter, they had the situation with Pritchard Colon on one of their televised cards where the kid, he may still be in a coma from now a couple of years at that point. And when he went down, Al Heyman is a PBC head. And he's a shadowy figure that doesn't make appearances, doesn't talk to the media, doesn't do anything like that in terms of public image. No one knows him in terms of that. He's just that, an advisor is what most people will call him. They refer to him by no other name. But when Pritchard Colon went down, Al Heyman went to visit him. So it's not something you take lightly. And Deontay should have known that. But I give him a buy at this point, because I think he's a very instinctual guy. I think he's very much, a guy who's got from Alabama, and now he's got the attention of the whole world in there. And he wasn't intending it to be that. I'm giving him a little bit of the benefit of the doubt, though I found it to be incredibly distasteful and in the repetition. And one of the things that's noticeable is that no one in his entourage or the PBC or anybody came out and said to him, hey, shut up. So
that's enough's enough.
It turned into a little bit of a black eye, but I think for your case, if anything, people will be rooting for Joshua to knock his ass out.
Well, but how much extra? I mean, look, the only thing that had to happen there was the promotion comes in and goes, that's done. You apologize or we cut the fight. Because that's not okay. And they didn't do that. And the reason they didn't do that,
behind the scenes, but if it was, I would have expected more of a formal apology from Deontay. Like I said, he didn't formally address the issue. So that's where it kind of is left hanging. But I think most people are going to let it slide again, because in the ring, Wilder got exactly what he needed to really maximize his next fight. And what he needed was an erasure. Now, Brazil perhaps can be knocked as an opponent, and now, because he didn't get to show anything, a lot of people may really poo-poo it. But the comparison to what Wilder did to Brazil and what Joshua did to Brazil is now going to be a huge talking point and is very important. And, for me, I think, I don't know, they won't come out and say it, but in some way, shape, or form, Wilder sent a message to Joshua. Because Joshua stood in front of Brazil face-to-face, because they're both big men. They're both 250-pounders, and he broke them down in his typical fashion. And he got him out of there. Didn't really struggle in the fight or anything like that. Brazil down a couple of times, and at the end, by the 8th or 9th round or 7th or wherever it was, Joshua did that. But Joshua's a 260-pound man. Wilder's 220. And Wilder is fast compared to Brazil. He said Brazil was not, he was a stationary target because I'm that much faster than him. And if Joshua's ever accused of anything, it can be being mechanical and muscle bound. With those two items in mind, he just knocked Brazil. Could Wilder get hit fast and early and it be done that way? I mean, could Joshua get hit fast and early and maybe get caught being slow? I think that's an open question now in the fight, right? So it made things very, very interesting for that fight. It pushes it more to the forefront, which it's going to be interesting how the negotiations go here because you got Fury there. So what do we get first? The Fury rematch with Wilder or the Joshua?
Let's hope.
Or do you go like Joshua Wilder?
It should be the Fury rematch, in my opinion. But either way, it at least heavyweight boxing is finally exciting again. It hasn't been in years. It's been a real bore.
Wilder added to that, and this year there was a lot of excitement coming in, and then there's been a little bit of after the Fury fight with Wilder. There's been a little bit of that feeling that we're not getting the Joshua fight. We're not getting the rematch. All of a sudden, everybody went their separate ways and stuff like that. But Wilder got it done in big fashion. Now we have to sit through the Joshua fight June 1st. Fury fights June 15th. They'll get those out of the way in the next month, and that means we'll see how the negotiations go. I think we'll see none of those guys meet this year. Hopefully, I'm wrong.
Okay, so that brings me to my next topic that I want to hit with you. I know we're kind of all over the page, but all of this, relates to the same thing. It's all about boxing and MMA, right? So we're okay to do this, and it's really about sports in general. But okay, you are, and a lot of people probably don't know this because they don't know matchmakers, so they don't know Joe Silva. They don't know that he's the guy who sort of made the UFC the UFC. You, in my opinion, and I've said this many times, and I stand behind it firmly, and we can throw a lot of facts out there, and I hope that you run this across the bottom taper at some point when we actually go through and redo this and put the full edit out. But you, in my opinion, are among the best MMA matchmakers in the world. Now, I know you haven't done it in a long time, but people don't understand that you discovered Chael Sonnen. I won't even go into that. I won't go into that list. I know it embarrasses you, but because you're humble about it.
Well, you play a role, but it's hard to really say. There are a lot of people I think that promote two fights for a guy and say, yeah, he's my guy. I found him. And I don't think that's the case. But I think if you're active and you're out there looking for people, and you've got a good Rolodex, that's the core of matchmaking. And then having an eye for the guys. So yeah, I have worked with an incredible amount of talented people in MMA. I was lucky that way. Chael's one of them. I got a nice email from Chael thanking me for one of the first contracts he had that he could kind of dedicate himself to when he was with Bodog. And I haven't talked to him since, but I know
Eddie Alvarez.
Right. I think that there's a lot of those type of guys, but where are we heading with all that?
Let me say where I'm heading with it.
Okay.
So, okay, you're the matchmaker, and I mean, I had to as a small promotion, man, it's tough out there, folks, and I mean that is a hard job. As a promoter / matchmaker, which the two shouldn't be the same, but in those days you couldn't afford to do. There were just so many obstacles to overcome that it was impossible. Regardless,
online is it was.
I generally play the promoter's role, is what I generally kind of identify with more than the matchmaker. Because as far as matchmaking is concerned, The only thing I looked for was, does it put asses in seats? And if it doesn't, then I don't want the fight. If it's a filler, okay, but it's only a filler to me. I'm not even interested in the fight. I would know the fighters. I would speak to them and be polite with them, but I'm not paying the kind of attention to them that I'm paying a guy who's selling 1,000 tickets in a 3,000 seat venue. So I'm the promoter, you're the matchmaker, and we have the Deontay Wilder thing that we're talking about. You as a matchmaker have made that match, and then he says the things that he said. It really rests on the shoulders of the promoter to say that's gone too far. And I can tell you personally that if he would have said that in my show, as detestable as I find it, I don't believe that I would have backed off in the day and said, you can't say that. I think I would have encouraged him to do more, because promoting is so difficult and there's so much on the line every single time that to not do every single thing in your power to sell tickets, you just can't afford that. You can't afford to have a bad show when it's hand to mouth over and over again.
And I understand that the problem at the certain level, and a difference with a promotion such as the PBC and then the more regional stuff that we've done.
Of course,
is that you could have at some point an ego, say, for example, a major executive who has nothing to do with the sports side at Showtime, who says, I'm offended. And then all of a sudden, your TV contract or some sponsorships could be a big deal there. And that's where it's at a different level. At the matchmaking level, I have a guy talking like that. I am a little bit concerned about the opponent, And because to me, I think one of the keys to matchmaking is making sure that both guys enter the ring knowing more or less they got a fair shot, that it's a competition, and that it's going to be fair.
Yes.
I think that's really important. There's certain situations where you might have a guy who is fighting a much more superior guy who knows he's probably going to lose but wants to test himself and things like that. Again, it's all about the mindset. You might know guys that know they're fighting a guy who's on steroids. And on the smaller shows, we couldn't drug test or anything like that, I've had, when we did our first show in New Jersey as licensed matchmakers, as licensed promoters, under the auspices of the New Jersey Commission, the New Jersey Commission came in and tested the fighters. And I remember the fight week, we had fighters that were fighting for us in shows where we hadn't done testing and stuff like that. One of them, very obviously a steroid user, came up to me and said, are they going to test me? And I was like, oh, yeah, you're going to get a test here. And, whether he blew positive or not after the fight doesn't really matter at this point. In those initial days, too, though, remember, Josh Barnett blew positive before it was legal or before they were definitely testing. They were doing testing kind of thing. And Josh Barnett ran into that, so sometimes they don't even count those positives, in the past and stuff like that. So this is around that time where, the commissions was just beginning to explore MMA and stuff. But it was, this athlete was forthcoming enough around the matchmaker to admit to me something that, I suspected all along, obviously. But there was kind of an open admission. So it was a different world that you lived in. Because right now, he trusted me a little bit too. That same athlete might be, in some other circles having to say, oh no, steroids are bad, and I hope I never face anyone on steroids and stuff. Meanwhile, he's jacked to the gills. But that's the thing is I think there's also in the discussion two conversations that go on. There's the rhetoric for the public, for everybody, where everybody has to say steroids are bad. Even John Jones has to talk the talk, at least. And then when you're in private, you can say, fuck, man, have you tried this? Or, hey, this guy's over there using that, or I'm hearing about this, or, I think there's, and then I hate to always use TJ Dillashaw, but his has been a very public fall, right? And
it's a big fall.
what was huge and alarming about that one was the number of other athletes who kind of said, "Come on, we told you so." You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But that
they came out and said we've known TJ was on forever.
But
and by admitting that, they're almost saying because we were doing it too.
And there's it's around, right? And that's the thing is for every guy that tests, now we know that they say, hey, you got anybody else who does this shit with you, so we can pop them too. And you could turn people in and stuff like that, you know. So
yeah, now you've got snitches.
That whole thing, that's again negatives and negatives to the bureaucratic system, right?
Yeah,
but I think TJ, the notable thing about TJ's fall is that it was very public, and that for the first time you had other athletes saying, "Yeah, we told you so," or whatever. Like not really. Like usually there's a code of silence, right? But that shows there was your first little window at there's a network of enhancing, and led by doctors too, because there are doctors who say, "No, my product, maybe it'll be on the steroid list now, but it's legal." Or I'm doing this for the science of it, or for whatever the motivations are. But those guys, so there's a hidden rhetoric there that you don't even see. That you may have many fighters who talk here to the public about how steroids are bad. No, I would never do steroids, and then you get them turned. You know, they get caught later. But over here, they were like, "All right, what you got for me?"
Okay, so that kind of brings us almost full circle. So we're back to the point where we talk about what is the next thing? What's the next thing on the list? What do you think it's going to be?
To me, I think inevitably there needs to be a philosophical change. And I know, you know, without getting into American politics or anything like that, that, you know, Russia is just the uttering of the word Russia is a controversial subject. But I think But I think that their approach to steroids, that it's a scientific approach, put the scientists on it, let the scientists do their science, let the athletes perform at their best. I think that philosophy adapted on a worldwide level would put a huge amount of resources now being consumed in trying to police something we can't into really policing it for the positive of it. So in other words, it's like, okay, you know, these guys are going to be on steroids. Make sure it's like, okay, this one here, because we still don't know the answer to any of the long-term questions, you know? It's like, do they result in memory loss? Do they result in X and Y and Z 30 years down the line as a result of the steroids use? We have no answers to any of those questions. So literally they are guinea pigs. But I think if we didn't do sports, if we were just a sedentary society that sat on their couches and sports didn't even exist as a concept, there would still be science trying to enhance some of those things because that's science. That's what they do. They pursue, that's what the system is, right? So I think you let the scientists do the science, and at the edge, you know, because what we've done here is we've taken guys who are scientists and said, don't do any cutting edge work. Don't learn or create or do something positive, just police.
Okay.
It's a completely, it's such a waste of resources. And my point is always going to be that we can't do it. You can't police it. There's so many, the system.
It's just like the drug war.
Exactly. Once you talk through what it would actually take, and there's no way to do it. You know what I mean? So, for example, on a worldwide level, if you're doing a boxing or an MMA fight in Russia, and you have as a background that Russia, during the Olympics, took the medical clinic that they built, a state-of-the-art clinic in Sochi, which is where the Winter Olympics were, and they took all the doctors that worked at that clinic and replaced them with agents of the FSB, which is their FBI, so that they would be handling, and I'm certain they were doctors too in the FBI, right? But these guys, they replaced everybody with an agent, so that all the drug testing and everything like that went very smoothly for all the Russian athletes and everybody else. Now, this was all put out. Now, under the current VEDA system, you go to Russia, you can fly 10 people to Russia to collect PP. But at the end of the day, you're into a scientific system, right? So now you're in Russia and you've collected all the PP. You don't go back to your hotel and put it in the mini fridge. You know what I mean? It doesn't work. You got to put it in a package with a label and send it to a lab where they have FBI agents. Or at the very least, you know, in places like Chechnya, where they have a strongman and stuff, very capable of spot checking and handling things to make sure that things go all right. And what Veda does is they look for those people in the chain of command here are volunteers. So it's like, hey, you work at a Russian clinic? Yeah, I work at a Russian clinic. Hey, so you want to volunteer to collect the PP? It's like, yeah, I'll volunteer to collect the PP. And then three guys, like, you know, those Russians where there's no curvature to the back of their head. It's just flat all the way back to the back of their neck, to the cords of the muscles on their neck. And they look at you like that. The three dudes like that show up at this doctor and tell him, look, the guy with the ski at the end of his name, we want his blood. What's he going to do? You're not even paying him. So how do you police all that? Maybe the Russians don't do that sort of stuff anymore.
I don't know the answer. I know this. I know that the war on drugs is not a war on drugs. It's a war on personal freedom. And I think that's very important I think that's a message that I've always promoted since the war on drugs started with Nancy Reagan. Was the one who really kind of amped it up with Just Say No and all that stuff. And, you know, the whole Reaganomics effect, 3 strikes and you're out. And it disproportionately affected a specific category of people, but we won't get into all that. But what I will say is this: the war on drugs is analogous to exactly what's going on with the war on PEDs. There's no real ability to win it. It's not a war anyway. It's an enhanced trial to see if they can make this problem smaller. But they know they're never going to win it. They know they're never going to catch them all. In fact, they know they're only going to catch a tiny percentage. So what is the point of blowing all that money when we could do exactly what you just said, which was, let's put that money, instead of making them stop, let's put the money into trying to make it more fair, safer for the athlete, and develop a concept and a philosophy that works for the sport, for the promoters, for the fans, so that everybody's happy with it. And because look, if you never said Vitor Belfort's a cheater because he took TRT, then no one would ever think anything of it. They only think cheater if that's a trickle down thing that comes from the athletes. So a guy loses, and maybe he was, maybe he wasn't on steroids, his opponent, but a lot of that, I saw a lot of that where guys would go, yeah, he's on steroids. That's the only reason he beat me. So there's a trickle down there where they go, well, he cheated. Well, did he cheat because he also had the money to go to Big Bear and train in altitude like we were talking about? Is it cheating because he has the ability to go to the UFC's training center and work in the bubble with the atmospheric pressure thing? Is it cheating because he has more money to hire better trainers? So there's no way to even bother trying to make all of this fair, because sports aren't fair. If they were fair, then it would always be a draw. They're not supposed to be fair. You're supposed to take one athlete versus another, one team versus another, and put these two dimensions together and see what happens when they collide. And that's the thrill of it. The thrill of it is the impact. And then the aftermath, you know, we sort through and we analyze. So just to end the conversation on this particular side of it and begin the new conversation, here is something that I think we're totally missing as a way to truly study this. Transgender MMA, transgender boxing, trans athleticism, I don't even know if anyone's ever used the term trans athleticism before. But I'm sorry, look, I'm as far left liberal as you can get. I have trans friends. I support transgender people in their struggle, and I can't even begin to imagine how difficult that must be. But I know transgender people personally who compete, and I know one individual in particular, and I'm not going to say any names. I'm not going to say anything about that person other than they are trans and they compete against women without telling them that before they went through the transition, they were a man. And they are very, very successful in the competition. Now, the person that I'm talking about in particular was very, very successful in competition before she transitioned into being a woman. So when she was a man, she was extremely successful. And so I know that carryover is there, but I think that begs the question even more because her hands haven't shrunk, and I mean, she's done a great deal. There's no, you would never look at her and go, that woman was a man who transitioned into being a woman, because when she was at birth, she was born with an identity issue and she did not identify as a man. And at X years old, she became a woman. The opportunity to study the effects of all of these hormones is so enormous in trans MMA. That's trademarked, by the way. We have that. The opportunity to do that study could change so much. We could discover so many different things, including what's the impact of brain injury on people who take estrogen. Does it lessen it? Does estrogen lessen someone's possibilities or the incidence of traumatic brain injury? There's a bucket load. There's a list so long I can't even begin to describe it, of what we could do with trans MMA, trademarked, that if we could do it, if we had the proper sponsorship that wanted to go forward with us on this, we could make this happen. We could have a massive study and we could do some amazing things. Talk to me about your initial thoughts on that before we go into the second stage.
Well, on a personal level, the whole transgender thing, I'm not an expert on. And I don't have a ton of experience on, in terms of the scientific ends of it and things like that. I did do a little research for this conversation. And to me, at its most essential, if we're talking about just policing a sport without other philosophies and stuff, just for policing a sport, what we're looking at a potential future with probably 4 leagues minimum. And that would be men to women, women to men, and then men and women, We don't let men compete with girls now, even in grammar school and stuff like that, because of the differences. So I think the first thing is that you have to kind of outline for complete, what are the differences at the most essential. So you can't just say all trans people are going to be in a league, because, women to men is very different than men to women. And because of those differences, now you're forced to separate them as another league, right? Now, this is where a lot I think is still a little bit up in the air with this whole trans kind of, we'll call it an awakening in the last 10 years or whatever, because it's just a lot more like the post Bruce Jenner kind of thing. It's much more mainstream now. You know what I mean?
Yeah, thank God. Thank God.
And here's the thing is again, like steroid use, I think we still don't know what this is going to look like, after time and things like that. There are already many people that also there's an aspect of people who regret having the transgender affect their lives and things like that. So I think it's a very delicate situation that among all of the things that really have to be figured out properly to handle the people properly, to handle them ethically, and to handle them in a way that's fair and scientific and everything, is that you got to do a real study, of which a part of it is if they also are have this experience and they want to compete as an athlete as well, because you can have that inside yourself. How can they do that? How can they do that? My fear is when you really break it down, it's like almost like in for example, in trans MMA. Right now, I think if we were going to have to start to do something like that, you would really have to start with, okay, men for women, women to men, that transition, that's a separation. So you do, say, women to men first or men to women first. It doesn't matter. Now once you get there, though, I don't think that you've got a reasonable expectation that you're going to be in the UFC situation there, which is like, hey, we have 9 weight classes, 30 deep with transgender women going to men, and they're number 8 is going to fight number 9 and stuff. I think you're going to be in a world with no weight classes, where if you can ethically make a fight and the guy's 210 pounds but doesn't have a lot of experience, and the other person has a little bit of martial arts experience but is 170 pounds, you may have to do that fight with just like we used to have to do in the old days of MMA before everything had really hashed itself out, right? So now, how is it? Because
of a lack of athleticism, because of a lack of athletes.
Because until that gets developed correctly. Now from here, this is where, and I have to caution that as Americans, we have a more or less, in general, not every American, right? But more or less, we have a forward-thinking way of this. Like, I don't think anybody, there's no reasonable rhetoric about getting rid of transgenders in the United States at all.
No.
That's the way, and that's the way.
Nor should there be.
But and there's no doubt about that. My fear is for a world sport, how's the rest of the world look for that? Because I have no doubt there are transgender folks. Just because of the explosion of people or people who might feel that way in countries that are very repressive towards that sort of thing. And they may have no outlet for it, So now, how am I going to get to them as an athlete, to sign them up for a league of this stuff if it's not even legal where they have, or if they can do it, and then when they go back to their country, they experience some kind of potentially hideous, potentially life-threatening repercussions from it. So it is a dangerous thing at the sport. So though you have experiences like I forget the girl's first name or whatever. If it's not a girl, I think she's transferred to female, so I would have to call her a lady now. But the last name was Fox.
Fallon Fox.
I apologize if I get it, but yes, but in Fallon Fox's case, you have to say that it's a little bit of a gimmick still. It really does look like a little bit of a gimmick because she's still, has she continued to compete? Or did...
Yes.
So they're still able to matchmake for her?
As far as I know, yes. I know that she is still in the market to compete, and that on smaller shows, if women agree to fight her, she will fight them. But is that fair?
Well, we'll talk about that in a minute. Fallon Fox is now 43 years old, so she's an older athlete. So a little bit of the dangers there. She's 5-1 in MMA. Yeah. The last fight is in 2014, so we can pretty much.
Okay, so she is
5-1 and retired. Now 5 years inactive. I think that hints at where we're short here to do something that's not, that's a full-on league. Is competition ran out for her. I don't think 5 or 6 fights is what's listed on her record. When someone embarks in a career, maybe where was her ability to get 20, 25 fights? So maybe ladies wouldn't fight her, right?
Yes.
Like ladies.
And worse.
So where are
Miguel,
135?
She was under the guise of not telling people that she was transgender.
Okay, but
And
now it's known what for it to be properly fair in a legal sort of way is I would need half dozen people in Fallon Fox's weight class to come out and say, I'd like to compete and I'm at this stage of my transition, or I've already transitioned, I'm in the same boat as her, and we can fight as equals, born men, transition to women, and all that change entails, we have that similar process. That makes us okay. Born a woman, born a man, transitioning to a woman, fighting a woman, born a woman, is different. It's proven, and it's proven by many people. Yep. Joe Rogan has excellent podcasts about just that particular subject. And being born a man, you can have whatever feelings you want inside, and that's just a totally different conversation. Because I think also there may be some people here who are not. There's a room here for confusion too. You know, you're going to have people who really are trans, I think, and then you're going to have some people that, through some other confusion, like I said, there's a world of this where they're starting to have regrets, and it's like I transitioned 20 years ago. Now it's the worst thing I did in my life. So I think it's a real complicated issue for that. So we didn't have 6 people who said, you know, I've been training in MMA, I've been doing kickboxing, and I'm a trans athlete and stuff, and let's go ahead and compete with Fallon Fox and try to put something together. Those athletes just don't seem to be there yet, and that's the one danger. But I think if you started with a good matchmaker, right? So you could, I think, you know, in the old days you had a situation where, okay, if you have a pool of 3 or 4 people here, you could do the best matchmaking possible. There may not be a capability to come up with great matches with the pool we have. But if you've got a certain type of athlete, like I said, things like weight classes, things like, you know, a guy who competed in kickboxing and then another person who's been transitioning who may have been a track and field star but wants to do that. I think we're going to run into that kind of early stages of development for an athlete. You know what I mean? So it's like,
Agreed.
So with that in mind, I think that if the atmosphere is there for truly having trans leagues, you can't just say, hey, we got a trans league right now with 9 weight classes and active fighters, and we're going to have champions and ranking the top 15 and stuff like that.
Yeah.
That I don't think, you know, I think that is the goal, right? That's
a generation away.
That's what you want to leave, you know, look, it's not a conversation I have about trans this isn't something you know. So if I offend by anything I say, like including I was going to say these people, I didn't want, you know, is that rude? I don't want to refer to them that way, but for the best legacy to leave transgender people with is fair leagues. And I think that what you have to do is you have to plant the seeds for eventually, if the sports, I could see it happening in basketball first, probably. Because it's a smaller team sport without combat, right? You know, in baseball, in golf, even then, you know, it's interesting to me because I don't know, you know, it's like, do you even need to do it in golf? It's like maybe, you know, if you're, I don't know, but golf is, I don't even care about golf, so it's like, I imagine. Whatever has to happen, it has to be fair for everybody. That's what our basis of the conversation is, right? So in whatever sport, but I'm thinking in MMA and boxing, the only fair end state is if you've transitioned, you must fight and you must be in a league with people who've also transitioned.
Okay, so look at this. We started this conversation really talking about promotions and what a promoter's willing to do to bring in people to see the show. Capitalism. We transitioned into steroids and what's the next stage in steroids, and then we transitioned into, well, how do we even really truly police this? Now we're into transgender athleticism. Here's another problem that I've never heard anybody talk about, and I'm shocked that no one has brought this up. And somebody probably has, and I just haven't heard it. But in in MMA, you have drug testing. For a woman to transition to a man, one of the main elements of that is taking testosterone, and sometimes quite a bit of it. Over not just, oh, this puts me to a man's level of testosterone, but several leaps over that.
A specific question, a science question, and I don't know.
I'll try to answer it.
Yeah, and let's make sure we have an answer, and if we don't, that's cool. But there is no way, like, let's say I'm a female and I want to transition to be a male. There is no way to do that transition without testosterone, is there?
None.
Okay, so then, but therefore, in terms of fairness for a league, I can say everybody competing has been through the same process at one point or another.
Well, what I'm getting at is this.
When you're active in the process, as opposed to now I'm 3-4 years after it, and I'm not taking the test I used to, there may be...
No, they still have to take testosterone.
Okay, so yeah.
Because their body doesn't produce it.
I think we're talking about... So now you're talking about something that everybody in the league is going to be undergoing the same type of process, so it's still within the realm of fair. Now, somebody could take a lot more than the others, and then you've got maybe a little bit of an item. But if we're also looking back at, I think here, what you have to keep in mind is this, is if you're going to be an athlete and you're going to compete as an athlete, you're blessed. You're lucky. The number one thing here is for them to complete their transitions safely, properly, and with all that takes.
Oh, definitely.
With testosterone and stuff, right? So,
yes.
So you can't have the rules to compete in a sport fuck up the proper science of what you're doing in the other things. So
there you go. The only way
is
for a
testing.
Female to male transition to be able to compete in MMA by MMA and boxing standard rules today, professionally anyway, I don't know about amateur, but professionally, the only way for them to legally, by the rules, be able to compete makes it impossible, because they have to take a banned substance, right? So you have the problem from women to men transitioning, and she becomes a male and says, I identify as a man. I've always identified as a man, and I'm not an expert on this. I try to be sensitive about it, and I certainly validate whatever their feelings are, because it's their feelings, not mine. So I don't know it, and perhaps the best way to do this is to bring people onto the show who are transitioning, who have transitioned, or who want to transition, and actually talk to them about that. But we're not there yet.
Yeah.
But what we are on today is this: trans MMA trademark is something that's going to happen eventually, because it already is happening, but it was happening behind the curtain. So Fallon Fox, when she originally was fighting, she didn't tell people that she used to be whatever her name was as a man. Okay. Here's another issue. Besides the fact that you have a multitude, a plethora of cocktails of chemicals involved that they have to take, many of which are banned, you also have this issue. And this issue is perhaps bigger than any of the others. And this will make me look like a totally insensitive asshole. But this is the fact, okay? The fact is that as a man, if I transitioned today at 47 years old, and I thought a 25-year-old girl in the prime of her athletic career, who weighed the same as me, and our testosterone meters tested the same, there's a very, very high likelihood that I would beat her. Very high, even if my skill set was much less than hers, right? So I say that just to precurse what I'm about to say. Most trans women and trans men do not want to be trans. They just want to be a woman or a man. And that's just from my personal experience speaking to them, reading what little I know about it, etc. I'm trying to be as ethical and at the same time as sensitive about this as I can be. And I'm sure I've fumbled that all over the place. Not intentionally, but the idea that I'm asking a woman now to compete, my friend who transitioned, who fought for me as a man, by the way, and then transitioned after that, and she lost everything. She was a pillar of the community, an incredibly good person in every way. I don't want to say anything else than that because I don't want to put her out there, but you know, she was an incredibly good person. And because of her transition, the ugliest, most horrible thing you can imagine happened. And maybe not the most horrible, but certainly it was ugly. Her volunteer work was taken from her. I better not say that. Let's just say that she lost her entire life to be what she had felt like she needed to be her entire life. And that is a tragedy in and of itself that I recognize. And so because of that, and I want to validate that, and I want to say that she wants to compete with other women because she is a woman. And I understand that neurologically. But physiologically, that is just not the case. Now, are there some that meet the requirements? Absolutely. Say a man was really effeminate, smaller boned, a smaller person in the first place, wasn't working out his entire life, and always knew I'm a girl, no matter what. I'm a girl. I don't do things boys do. I do things girls do. Not that boys and girls don't do the same thing or anything like that, but you know, this is the kind of sensitive stuff that we have to consider, because we also have to consider, is she willing to fight only transgender women because she says, I'm not transgender, I'm a woman. And at that point, you have to take that away and you have to say, this is the only way we can police this fairly. There's no other way to do this.
The bottom line is throwing their own philosophy at them. They're fighting women. There are women, and that is exactly what they're doing. They're fighting the women most close to them in terms of, fairness in science, when all that is reckoned with. Because
we have weight classes. Now we have to have gender classes. You can't, right? So we have MMA and we have female MMA, right?
Mm-hmm.
So there's an opportunity here to have a third class for MMA, because we have a third class of speciation now, if you will, or of sexualization, and that is that there are people who are born and they are not born in the body that their brain is. I know that's a terrible way of putting that. Look, and I'm fumbling all over it, but
I don't want to talk too much about a subject where I really am, not an expert or anything like that. But understanding a little bit about psychology and stuff like that, what we know about the human brain and psychology, Sigmund Freud used to be a cokehead, so science, but Freud's word was taken as law for a long time in that. And now many of his theories have also changed and things like that. So this transgender thing, I still think needs on a scientific. If it's No, don't go anywhere.
Oh, there you are.
Yeah.
Okay. I sorry, I lost you there for a moment.
Yep, I saw myself go, so I apologize for that. Hopefully we'll get that.
And I couldn't hear anything that you were saying. So can you start over with that, please?
All right, where was I?
I lost you at basically shoot. ADD.
Yeah. No,
okay, how about we take off from here?
Yeah, and this might be a good place to go.
Do you believe that there is do you believe there's room in athletics for a trans athleticism league in whatever it might be? For example, we have female football. I'm in Indiana, the Midwest, and there are female football players here. And I just happen to know one of them pretty well. And she has told me, she said, it certainly would have been much easier for me growing up as a man than it would be to have grown up as a woman with my proclivities. Mm-hmm. She said, because everything that I did, I was, at first I was a tomboy, but then as I grew older and older, I became the.
So I remember exactly where I was when I got cut off too. It's the bottom line.
Okay, go ahead.
When we get into like the history of psychology and stuff, many of Freud's things used to be law last century, and they've changed and adapted as we've gotten more here. I think the transgender thing is still in its very nascent stages, and it has to get a lot more science behind it to properly understand it, to make sure that people who are just not confused aren't going through that and then regretting it and things like that, and it's legitimate for each individual, right? Because if that condition exists, it's going to exist worldwide. Then the worldwide thing, through science, has to come along, and then in places where ignorance exists, you kind of have to move that needle. That's when somebody doesn't have to be ashamed or want to compete. Now, in terms of if you feel like you're a woman and you don't even want to get into the past where you used to be a man and all that stuff, then I'm afraid you can't compete.
Okay, I will tell you this: the number one when I began to put together Trans MMA, and a little bit about this with me, because we sort of started talking about it, and you said, well, kind of to develop something and let's talk to some people about it. And so I developed a basic guideline. It's so broad and so huge, and it's such a tentative subject that's very difficult to approach. And when I took it to a few different people as possible investors, they looked at it and they kind of didn't know what to do with it. One of the things they were really interested in, though, was the research. I always found people were interested in the research more than they were the cause. And although I am a researcher and I'm an academic and I'm very much interested in the research, and I believe that it could help in multitudes of different ways, including it could help us look at, okay, now we know more about this. We brought this on the table. It's an open topic, and people don't have to be in the closet about this anymore. The way, 10 years ago, men and women still had to be in the closet if they were gay or lesbian or bisexual. And the transgender is catching up with that, but it's not there yet. Transgender men, I think men more than women, but transgender men specifically that I know of say that the number one thing that bothers them about the idea of competing on a level where it would be, say, filmed, broadcast, looked at, analyzed, is that they don't want the first question that comes out to happen. And that is, what did you look like before you transition? With women, with women who transition to being a man, they generally say, I didn't look that much different than I do now. Because I took methods to take my breasts down if they had large breasts, or whatever the situation was.
Sure,
you know,
and hair, you know, I mean,
they kind of dressed a specific way, but men, because of the hypermasculinity of just the United States alone, men are so much. It's such a prejudice, and it's so bigoted against that it's almost like you can't even speak on it still, which is just crazy. This is 2019. It's crazy that people are still so biased against somebody for wanting to be something. No one ever got on me because I like dating women. It was kind of the way I looked at it. And so I'm not going to get on somebody else because they want to be something else. No one ever got on me because I wanted to lift weights. Why should I get on someone else because they don't want to, or whatever it is? So a lot of this is about personal choice, and we need to recognize and validate people's personal choice and say that if that's your personal choice, it's not harming anyone else, and that's fine. Now, transitioning children before they're 18 years of age, that's got a lot of questions looming that we don't have the answers to. But Miguel, surely this could be a great place to start, wouldn't you think, with trans MMA? Look at the doors we could open just by doing this.
To me, I feel this way. I feel like an old guy talking about a new subject, right? Because we didn't talk about trans sports in the 70s and 80s when we were growing up and stuff, right? It wasn't that active, right? So again, once again, I kind of shudder at being ignorant, but I'm not a person who's avert. Like I hate when people say no, and I hate, you know. So it's like, yeah, they should be able to be no, you can't compete. It's like that's not a good answer, you know. But does the league but it also doesn't, to me, curtail what's very clearly a lot of work needs to be done for it to be done correctly, for it to not be a sideshow, and for it to not be, you know, and a lot of that is on the other side. It's not the sports world, you know. There's a lot of understanding and things that have to happen. I think you know, you have many people that do understand it, you know. Like, for example, fortunately, I think a trans person was killed in Dallas last night, and it's on the cover of CNN as, you know, a possible hate crime and things like that. So I think that there's a general understanding, but I think that inevitably there is going to be that huge, you know, for lack of a better word, and I don't want to accuse all, you know, is it rednecky or is it like low class American or ignorant American, where it's like, oh, queers, you know, like that kind of that those people for trans, I think, are all going to recycle themselves again. You know, like the guys that don't like fags. It's like, you know, who cares what, like you said, it's like, but like those types of people, I think are going to pop up again, thinking that no, this is different, this is worse, or something like that. And it's not. It's just, you know, I think it's, again, if a person is feeling these things and choosing to live their life this way, I think a person who's made a decision to be trans, to make a decision right now, even in 2019, to lead a very difficult life. And
I certainly wouldn't want to have to go through what they go through.
More power to them if they feel so strongly that they have to do that. Then I don't think that there's a reasonable way that somebody can just say no, we're you know, that's bad or anything. In other countries, that struggle is going to be real. That struggle is going to be people dying. You know what I mean?
Yes. And people being.
You know, and I'm saying another country, a person was killed in Dallas. That should, you know, if that person was killed because they were a man and now they're a woman, they made the news in April because they got beat up and now they're dead. So if there's some type of long feud relationship or some type of other story there, I don't know. And I apologize for bringing it up as an example, no. But just the fact that a person is dead, maybe because they're trans, you know, I don't know. Death is so final. And it's just so, you know, it's, you couldn't walk the other way. You couldn't just, you know, I can live my whole life and not be affected by trans people. I have, really, you know what I mean? It's like it exists. It's like I don't need to go and say, Bruce Jenner, I'm against you or anything like that. He can do anything he wants. Now is, you know, I'm going to forget the name. Caitlin, I'm sorry, but he can do whatever he wants. And really, if I choose to, it doesn't really have an effect on me. And it doesn't affect him if I'm not sitting there going, "Oh, that's bad," or he's a queer or anything like that. If then there's no effect.
Yeah.
Why can't we live that way? You know what I mean? So that's why I'm here talking about a league of something that to me is a little bit new and a little bit, of an odd subject, and that's something I naturally thought of, right? But
Yeah.
if you're going to do the right thing, I think that's the right thing to do. Now if you're against trans people or anything like that, I'm not sure that that's the discussion that we're having here.
We're absolutely not having the discussion of whether we're against trans people or not. That hasn't been on our plate at all.
In the States, that hopefully is becoming less and less of the rhetoric. But on a worldwide level, that's the frightening part. So that in general, the MMA league, and there's so many trans people in the world, maybe 10 generations from now, there'll be 15,000 trans people in a stadium watching a trans team or trans athletes perform or do shows and stuff like that. And is that a new type of prejudice? Do trans support the trans athletes and stuff? It's like, I won't go to a show if it's not trans. You know what I mean? That's a great end state. If there's, if it's such a solution for so many people that the economies are built and they can support themselves and maybe, have some crossover support and they also go support other athletes and stuff like that. That's the end state that's perfect for sport. People can do what they want and you accept people for what they are. But man, like I said, it starts with UFC 1 all over again. Like a girl who's
you're
good
right.
at fighting,
You're right.
A girl who's good at fighting, a big girl who's kind of tough, and again, using the term girl, in whatever the appropriate fashion.
I get it. So here's kind of the bottom line, and we probably ought to wrap it up on this, but here's my finality to it. Where trans MMA is concerned, trademarked, where trans MMA is concerned, I am looking for people who want to support me and financially, specifically, to help me build this league and to do a show with all transgender fighters facing one another. And I'm not saying that as the end of the discussion. I'm saying let's begin the discussion, because there's no other way to begin the discussion than this, because we've already made the decision that women are coming out now in competitive powerlifting. There are trans women, there are women who used to be men who have transitioned to women who are powerlifting and destroying the very highest women's powerlifting records effortlessly. Not just by 100 pounds, but like by 300 pounds. There's no way to deny this or to proclaim that this doesn't exist or that she's a woman and we just have to accept that and that's it, because that's just not fair to other women. Nor is it fair to women who want to transition to men, to being a man, and they have to take specific chemicals to do that, and they're unable to compete due to the chemistry that they have to undergo. So that's not fair either. So I don't think that anything that I'm saying or that we're talking about is in any way bigoted. I don't believe that it is in any way a stretch of moral comprehension. I think it's simply a matter of this is the most pragmatic thing we can do at this time. Now, we talked earlier about CRISPR and Cas9 and gene editing and things like that. That's going to be where this is going to go in 15 or 20 years. And then we won't have this conversation. And they'll look back on this and they'll say, wow, those bigoted, racist, sexist scumbags, and we'll be labeled that way, but we're going to be labeled that way no matter what, if nothing else, due to male white privilege. And there's no denying that we have male privilege and white privilege. No denying that at all. And so that plays a role in how we see this. And so it becomes difficult for us to even talk about this without having trans people here to discuss this as well. And so what I would really like is I would like to have trans people that I can talk to and ask questions and find out what is the right way to do this. How do we go about this? Do you agree with this? Do you disagree with that? Where are we at on all of this? And that seems to be, like you said, we're at a beginning point. This is a launching point wherein we could open up the spectrum for millions of people who otherwise are cheated out of being able to be who they are and do what they want to do simply because of a genetic predisposition of X's or Y's, a chromosomal matter. And so from that, I say it's a great place to start. And on top of that, it allows us to have research that we otherwise couldn't have. And so it's a two-way street, and both ways, to me, seem like the only place to begin. And if there's a better place, there's a better way, I want to hear it. I want to talk about it. I want to discuss it, but I don't know it. But I do know that this at least allows people like Fallon Fox, and there are many others, trans women, to be able to compete and not be and have it not said, well, she cheated because she used to be a man. It no different than he cheated because he was on steroids. So at least that gives us a beginning point, because things have to be launched from somewhere. They have to begin in order to make any progress. Otherwise, it stays in the closet. You know, if you want flowers to grow, you've got to put them in the light.
Yep. So anyway, Chad, we've gone long, and it's been a terrific podcast having you back here. Why don't we end the discussion, put the editor to work, and we'll get this chopped up into a couple of different blasts of knowledge dropping here from the CRP.
Hey, that sounds great to me. I'm glad to be back. Special thanks to Miguel, ASP, Anthony Scott Pyatt, and Devin Miller for holding the ship down for me while I was going through a lot of rough changes in my life and a lot of things going on, personal stuff with my family. I really appreciate it. We will keep you updated on the Soda Pop episodes. So if you want to check out my son and what his progress is, subscribe, go to YouTube, look at Facebook, look up Cage Rage Podcast Presents the Soda Pop and Dadalac Speech Show, and you can see exactly how far he's coming with his first stem cell treatment, with only one stem cell treatment. So you can be a part of this simply by subscribing to the podcast and watching and checking it out. And once a week, we come in here, we enter the office, and we do our thing, and he takes 5 or 10 minutes, and he shows you a couple of new words he's learned, just like Miguel does with Chico and his ability to, you're teaching him to speak English, and people like that as well. So we've got a pretty high analytic mark on that one too. So there's something for everybody here in the CRP. I appreciate everyone tuning in. Subscribe, follow us, and most importantly, share and let everybody else know about us. Miguel, I'll see you later, my brother. Namaste.
Ciao.